What does it mean to fully forgive? It can be a long and difficult process, filled with resentment, anger, and suppressing the natural human desire for vengeance. It took years for Tasreen Khamisa to come face to face with Tony Hicks, the man that murdered her brother Tariq in a gang-related robbery. For Tasreen, a Shia Ismaili Muslim who was raised with core values of compassion, tolerance, and helping others, it was initially very hard to find a way to move forward, not only for her family, but for Tony's as well. But the day they first met face to face, during visiting hours while Tony was serving a prison sentence, they locked eyes and everything changed. Today they consider each other like siblings, and they work together to spread awareness of restorative justice through the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. Listen in as Tasreen and Tony talk about the challenges of forgiveness, their relationship, and moving forward together. Thank you both for joining me today. One of the things that I did to prepare was talk to my friend Sydney Morris. And Sydney grew up in inner city LA. And I said, Sydney, I've got these two really powerful, unique people coming on that love and trust each other now after this shared trauma. What do you want me to ask them? And I told them a little bit about your backstory. And one of the questions Sydney said, well, here's what I want to know. You said, Doc, you should ask them on that day, on that day when Tariq was killed, what was so important to you that you were willing to go that far to show your loyalty to the gang?
Well, what was important to me is that I wanted to maintain the family connections that I felt that I had built with my gang members, my friends within the gang. I had a falling out with my grandfather. This is documented. I had a falling out with my grandfather, and I had felt like he was my last familial connection in this world that nobody else in my family really wanted me or cared for me. And I thought I lost that with him. And when I ended up ultimately murdering Tariq, what was important to me is that I didn't lose the male connection in the world, and that was the gang that I was in.
So you felt orphaned at the time, yes, and that your gang was that family. And so it was that lifeline that you didn't want to lose.
Yes, absolutely.
If I said, and this is me thinking, this thought, that gangs are born from trauma like this, would you agree with that? Why or why not?
I guess, yes, absolutely. Gangs are born from trauma, and gangs are born from a desire to feel connected to something. A lot of us who were in gangs, even the guys that I was very close to at the time, all had losses in their lives of some magnitude. I had losses in my life. My fellow co-defendants had their own individual losses in their lives. Sometimes we talked about them, but we never got too in depth in them. So I think that kind of steered us towards each other and steered us towards creating something or being a part of something that we felt would not leave us or would not disappoint us. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think that would be correct. The gangs are formed out of trauma.
And, you showed, a willingness to express a lot of loyalty on that day. And you served, in prison for many, many years after that. And my friend Sydney said, I should ask you, did anyone in your former gang put money on your books or support you in other ways when you went to prison? Did they keep that connection with you? Or was there some turning point where it kind of changed and you broke from that family that you had known into a broader concept of who you were and what your life could be about?
The change came much later. The change came much later in my life where I felt I could break away from not just the gang itself, but the mentality that kind of cultivate while in that environment. To answer your question, No one from my former gang placed books or sought to take care of me. At the same time, I was in a different space, so I didn't require that, nor did I ask for it. Like all my I was in the gang with, I never continued to maintain communication with them on any consistency, and ultimately, especially the guys that I committed a crime with, we ultimately just grew apart from different directions as we evolved, in our maturity.
Yeah, you said that you had to grow up really fast in prison. I was really interested to hear you talk about that a little bit more. What was that shift? And here, I'm not saying, prison is good for people or that it is, always helpful for people to mature them. But you made that comment. So I just wanted to follow up and learn more about that.
I did have to grow up really fast. Prison is very serious. I was in a maximum security level 4 prison for the majority of my time, except for the last 2 years before I was broke. So that was 22 years of my time I was in maximum security. Prison is very, very serious. It's highly racialized. It's it's hard to explain. It's kind of surreal in a way, but in order, you couldn't be a kid in prison. You couldn't be a child. You couldn't have didn't have hopes and dreams, but you couldn't. The giggling stopped. The joking stopped. The you didn't have time to really kind of figure it out. You had to kind of follow behind someone else and try not to get hurt in the process.
Yeah. So I would imagine you're laser focused on survival,
That was
all the time.
that was the bulk of my focus, survival, and later it was self-improvement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the shifts that I heard you say was that when Tasreen reached out and when her father reached out, Asim reached out, it was really you starting to see that you were somebody worthy of forgiving. How did you make that transition in your healing?
That was a transition that I don't feel like I could take credit for the most part. My grandfather worked very hard in order to not allow me to lose myself in the environment that I was in. He's seen that environment as temporary for me when I was unable to see at 16 that my life in prison will be is only a temporary moment in my time on earth. So my grandfather, Azim, both of them are, I have to give them a lot of credit for the shift that was made in my life, not allowing me to just kind of slip into the regular role of prison and think that was going to be my forever. They even when I did in myself, in my person, feel like that was going to be my forever. My grandfather fought that, not vehemently, but he fought that, and he always talked to me about that. And the forgiveness provided me the love that my grandfather showed me. The start to see that I could make a change, and I needed to make a change, or regardless of whether I.
This is your grandfather that was a Vietnam veteran?
Yes.
Did you guys talk about his traumas or his time in service or any of that? Did you have a relationship where you discussed those things?
Yeah, we do have a relationship. He shared those things with me. Those are his story.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he draws comparisons. He like tapped into his own personal history in order to kind of show me how he was able to come out of things. And even now, I make my transition world and make the adjustments that come necessary. Being out here, he still guides me, and a lot of that comes from his own personal experiences. Right for now, more so than I was when I was a kid, because when I was a kid, I couldn't see how it pertained to me, but now I see the incidence of it all.
Yeah, he sounds like an extraordinary person I've seen as well. And Tasreen,
certainly extraordinary.
Yeah, it goes against the human grain for most people to consider this kind of radical forgiveness and compassion. And one of my goals is to really help people understand your Sufi faith and how, some people have distorted ideas about what Islam is. And it was your faith and your spiritual life that was played a role, as well as Tariq's voice, I think, in prompting you to go beyond forgiveness into a relationship with Tony. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you were able to penetrate that natural human emotion of anger and access such a radical depth of forgiveness.
Yeah, no, I think the way I was raised, like in being a Shia Ismaili Muslim, was always, I think, rooted in service and helping others. And that was always a big practice of the faith. I think also the kind of esoteric inner peace that we all strive to find was like really integrated into the practice of just meditation and prayer. So I think I grew up in a family that was very spiritual and had a very spiritual lens in life. So really, I think embodying, we're human beings, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so I think that was ingrained in me in a young age. But when this happened to, our family and me in particular, it was hard. It was painful. It was one of the most painful things, that could have like happened to our family. But my father, Azim Khamisa, who I always say is just way more evolved than me, he really saw this tragedy happening to two families always, and Tony being a part of that. And so I think his way of viewing this was just this kind of awe-inspiring image for me, but I was not there yet. I was still really in a lot of pain. But I think when my father said that, it really meant, that this happened in America with, an American brother, an American son, and that he saw a responsibility, because he really truly felt that Tony was a victim of society, a victim that we all have jointly created, and that he had a responsibility to do something about this, and that he did see victims at both ends of the gun. And I think it came from a place of humanity.
Yeah.
And from our family, it came from a place of humanity. And for me, kind of going through this, I was at a real crossroads when all of this happened, because I spent my entire senior year in university. I majored in sociology. I emphasized in juvenile delinquency. Oh. I always knew that there was not the same opportunity for all children. Like I learned that at a very young age. And I was bullied a lot in school. Tariq was really bullied a lot in school. Both of us got beat up a ton. I remember, it kind of silenced me as a young girl. But as I got older, I had a teacher that I think that really changed my life, and really helped me find my inner strengths. And I knew at that moment that I was going to somehow serve young people. And I spent my entire year kind of studying why young youth commit homicide. And it's always because of their trauma, right?
Before Tariq was killed, you did all this?
Yeah, before Tariq was killed, I did all this. Tariq was at my college graduation. This was this was before we lost him. And I always knew that I wanted to work with young people. And I studied cases like my brother's and Tony's my entire senior year in university, so I had, I think, an understanding and a bit of empathy already.
That when kids kill others, it's because of trauma. Can you say more about that? That's really important. I don't want to miss that.
Yeah, well, I think hurt people hurt people. I think, I think those of us kind of in this like healing space in our work, we understand that hurt people hurt people. And for someone to take someone's life, there has to be a lot that has happened for them to get to that place. And I had an understanding of that at some level, just through like my education and what I learned in school. But of course, when this happened to me and it happened to my brother, I had a lot of emotions like anyone would have, and there was a part of me that like had understanding and empathy for Tony, but there was like a part of me that was really angry. So I had to kind of reconcile those pieces for myself. And it took me a good, 3 years, I think, to get to a place where I really, truly understood that the way I dealt with this was going to impact the rest of my life. And I think my father was such a role model for that. And it was rooted in our faith. When we lost Tariq, my father did speak to a spiritual advisor, and that person told him that the only thing that he could do for Tariq now is to do good deeds in his name, because that would create spiritual currency for Tariq's soul. And my father always said he wanted Tariq's soul journey to, be in a rocket ship. He wanted to, create enough spiritual currency for him. And it really was the birth of the foundation, was that mindset of how do we do good deeds in Tariq's name. And I knew that watching my dad and watching him start to create the foundation, I wanted to be there to help him, and I wanted to get there, but it took me a while to work on my own healing. And I then realized that, me forgiving Tony was for myself. So I could let go of the pain and anger and resentment that I was holding on to. And I knew I needed to do that in order to like start my path of healing and give myself the courage I needed to move to San Diego and to do this work. And I always think of forgiveness as layers. And I peeled off that first layer, and I peeled that first layer off for myself. It really had nothing to do with Tony. It just allowed some light in my heart for love and compassion to live there. And the more I worked with the foundation, the more I worked with TKF, the more I worked with students, the more I served, which was the root of why TKF was founded. The more I served, the more I healed. The more we help others, the more we heal ourselves. And that was really the start of my journey.
Acadiana Veteran Alliance is committed through their HEAL program to support veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, to reduce their symptoms and improve overall quality of life through use of the stellate ganglion block medical procedure. AVA is fundraising to raise money to allow veterans to receive stellate ganglion block, or SGB, in combination with traditional therapies provided by therapists with expertise in trauma and veteran treatment, to achieve long-term resolution of post-trauma symptoms. To donate, please visit Acadiana Veteran Alliance. What I like about your journey and the way you express it is that you are clear that it was not easy or instant or, an uncomplicated set of emotions. You had complicated emotions. It took you years to get to a place of forgiveness. And you didn't do it for anybody but for yourself at first. And then it opened up the space for you to have this relationship. Because the work you do, both of you, through the Tariq Khamisa Foundation is not just based on this sort of detached forgiveness. It has to be based on strong mutual attachment that's grounded in both love and trust. And I'm really interested to learn, once you started to have a relationship, how did you develop that love and trust with each other?
Tasreen?
I just knew you were going to say my name. I totally felt you just going to say that. It did not happen overnight for me and
Mm-hmm.
Tony, I think, at all. And I think that was really meant to be with the two of us. I think that we both, it took Tony and I's relationship started 20 years after this tragedy happened. I didn't meet Tony until 2015. And so I think from, 1998 to, 2015, I did a lot of like, um, I had a lot of time to really honor Tariq. I had a lot of time, I think, to lift up him in the work that I did with the foundation. And I poured my heart and soul into TKF and in growing TKF's programming and our work, and really pouring myself into working with young people. And I stepped away from the foundation staff for a while, and I just kind of remained on the board. And so in that time, I think I was just on my own journey. I became a mom, and I was working on myself. And my life took another turn of events, and I ended up back on staff at TKF. And it was when I ended up back on staff at TKF, I just had this strong feeling like I needed to meet Tony. It was almost like this pull, like it was, it was part of my forgiveness journey. I feel like I'd peeled off some more layers. I had peeled off that first layer, and the more I healed, the more I served. I peeled off more layers. I had more empathy for Tony. I learned about his story. I talked to him with my father. I talked with him about him with Pless. I was always kind of connected to hearing about him. And when I did hear about him, my compassion and understanding and empathy for him continued to grow. But I didn't feel the need to have a relationship with him even then. But in 2015, I felt really strongly about it. It was just this real pull. And then when I did meet Tony for the first time, I went with Pless and I met Tony in prison. And I don't know, there was just a strong instant connection or bond that I felt with him immediately. And we spent several hours together, and it was so easy to talk to him. And I just felt like this instant sibling kind of connection with him, like right away. And something kind of in me stirred, I think, a new purpose for me within the work of TKF. And that purpose was really around, how do we like lift up restorative justice in this story? And how do I get him out? How do I help get him out? I think it was really heartbreaking for me to know that he had been in there for so long. It was heartbreaking for me to see him stand against a white wall and leaving him that day. And I think that was like what birthed our connection. And we stayed in touch. We stayed in touch, and we wrote to each other, and we talked on the weekends, and our relationship really grew, and our friendship grew for 3 years that way. And I visited him again, and I have just a strong care for Tony, and it just continued to grow and grow and grow. And I really focused on his parole hearing a lot of just was like, okay, what do we do to ensure that we've done everything we can on our side to make sure that he's paroled? And then
what did you say to them at the parole hearing in sort of like summary from your heart about why you felt like he should not be kept in prison for, going forward, why he should be paroled?
I said that I think that Tony would be more accountable to us outside those prison walls, and that they needed to give him back to his family, and including his TKF family, his Khamisa family, that he would do, that he was a teacher now, and we needed him to be a teacher because he will help save a lot of young people's lives by sharing his journey and sharing his story. And I think that's what I said.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and tell me if I picked up on this accurately. So you had studied why youth commit homicide.
Yes.
And you knew this stuff, like intellectually, you knew it. That wasn't what shifted you. It felt like when I was listening to your story that it was actually Tariq's spirit that moved you in some ways. Like you started to feel compelled. And you said that in that first meeting on one of the stories I read with Tony, Tariq's spirit was there with you in the room. And then you described this sort of like sibling connection with Tony, this instant feeling of a bond. It felt like there was something well above books and learning and, what you sort of knew intellectually about this that really allowed your spirit to connect with Tony's spirit. And I just want to know if I interpreted that correctly or if you wanted to speak more into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt my brother very strongly. I feel my brother very strongly, like I have, like all for since this happened, and especially when I joined the foundation, I really have felt that he's been this like guiding light for me. He's been this support around me. I have had vivid dreams with my brother always when big things are about to happen. And we're always at this cafe in Kenya where it was kind of my brother and I's last trip was in Kenya. We used to hang out in this cafe in Kenya. And I have these vivid dreams about us both there. And he's always talking and I'm always listening. And he came to me before each one of my kids was born, before I got married, before I moved to San Diego. But he did even come to me 2 days before I met Tony. And he did tell me that you and Tony will be working together. And
Wow.
I'm really happy that you're going to have start to develop a relationship with him. And so I did feel my brother there with us very
it wasn't
strongly.
Just like giving you his blessing. It was like a compelling sense that his spirit was behind you in moving you towards this alliance and partnership and friendship and familiar connection, with Tony. And that's what I was kind of picking up on, is that it's really, you've continued to keep Tariq in your life and continued that conversation with him. I spent 3 years of my career working with people who lost a loved one to suicide. And one of the most important things I learned during my time at TAPS was that love is not about saying goodbye. It's about, or grief, excuse me, that grief is not about saying goodbye. It's about keeping that connection and carrying that love forward. And that's your rocket ship, and now Tony is with you on this same mission. And I wondered from you, Tony, if you could talk to Tariq now, the person you are now, not who you were, but who you've evolved into being, what would you want to say to Tariq now?
I mean, of course, first I would apologize to him for taking him away from his family and all the people that loved him and that he loved. I will also let him know that I'm not taking this second chance at life for granted. And I'm trying to do everything that I can to continue to make myself a better person, be a better person in my life, and as well help as many people as I can while I'm here.
Yeah, that is such a pure way, I think, to honor who Tariq is in that relationship you hold with each other and that work that you do. And, as I hear you speak, Tony, your heart and your humanity and your authenticity is so clear to me. It's such a powerful example of how we are not one action. We are not that. We are so much deeper and bigger than that. And I'm so glad that you found a real family here, the Khamisa family, and your grandfather. You have reunited and just restored your understanding of your worth, because I know that you guys are having tremendous impact in what you do. can you finally kind of, to close us out, think about one example of a moment that helped you both feel positively connected in a really meaningful way to Tariq and his memory?
My moment comes from the story that Tasreen just told, that when I got out and she told me that she had a dream, that Tariq came to her in a dream, and they were they were talking, and he said that we were going to work together, and he was happy about it. He was excited about it. I felt like that was really a kind of nod towards everything kind of coming together. It was, for me, it was a nod towards this journey that we had all been on, no matter how hard it was and how traumatic and how how sad it was for all of us, that now we are at this point in our lives and we are able to be in each other's lives, be of support to one another, and work together in order to help people. I thought, for me, that was telling me that this is what my life is going to be now.
That's awesome. What about you, Tasreen?
I think for me, it's hard to like find just one moment. I think my brother was very wise, very articulate, I think very eloquent in the way he expressed himself. And so I know when I first started at the foundation, I remember like sitting in board meetings, this new kind of staff person, really nervous. And I remember things would come out of my mouth and I would be like, that's not me at all. Like, I don't even sound like that. Like, I knew that like I sounded just like him. I would say really smart things. And I was like, that's just not what I like sound like at all, And so I felt like he was always guiding me. I'm really like naturally very shy. I'm an introvert. And whenever I had to speak, anytime I would get so nervous, and I would always ask him, like, help me find the right words, help me say the right thing, help me, connect to that, like my soul and the inside of me, like where that my wisdom sits. And I always felt him guiding me in those moments. I think becoming a mother, and seeing pieces of him in my kids, has been those moments for me. They all have little parts of him, that I feel like his spirit really lives on in my children. And then I think there was one moment when I came back to the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. It was the first year of the Women's March that we participated in here in San Diego. And there was something like, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 people that showed up to that, or maybe even more. And we were holding up signs for Tariq because it happened to be on January 21st, which is the anniversary of this tragedy. And we were holding up signs for Tariq and kind of honoring him at the Women's March. And I probably ran into 5 people that knew him, that had gone to school with him, that were in the fraternity with him. And I just thought, how cool is that? Out of all these thousands of people, it was almost like a wink, like, hey, I'm around,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been a continuous conversation then that you've had with Tariq, and really seeking out, his spirit in all of what you do. And Tony, he, has kind of set you on your path with his very supportive presence for the two of you to work together and do this great work. And I know that you are changing and saving lives. And I know that the work you do goes well beyond book knowledge. It's really, Tony, you just bring that applied expertise of having that lived experience and the moral authority to talk to other people that may have a background like you had that drove you into the situation that became a tragic event on January 21st. And so that moral authority and that will to honor Tariq together, it's incredible. And the relationship that you two have with each other is so deeply inspiring. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to put that on display. Any last thoughts on what you want people to understand about trauma, how it affects us, or how we can heal from it? From either of you.
Tasreen.
I love you. Okay. I think, for me, when I think about what I've learned from all of this is that, we can transcend the worst thing that ever happened to us. We can transcend the worst thing we've ever done. That, we all are humans. We all make mistakes, and those moments don't have to define us for the rest of our lives. And that when we can heal, when we truly are intentional about our own healing, and healing is a lifelong journey. I don't think it's a moment. I think it's something that you work on. I think for those of us that have had traumas in our life, have had tragedies in our life, we have to work on our healing every day. And it's intentional practice, and it's those muscles of empathy and compassion and forgiveness that we all have to practice and build every day. But if we are able to do that, we can then stand in our purpose. We can show up for ourselves and show up for our loved ones and others in healthy ways, and we can serve the greater good. And I think that is really the power of healing. And for me, it brought Tony into my life in such meaningful ways. And he's the one person that I can talk to about anything. He's the one person that I know has my back. And he's the one person I is one of my best friends. And I think that if I hadn't intentionally worked on my own healing, I wouldn't have him in my life. And he's a good part of my life.
I can tell. It's so cool to see how you guys care for each other so authentically, so deeply. And, I really absolutely agree that the forgiveness work that you've done is something that you have to work at. It's part of the conversation I had with my friend Sydney in the light of your story is that, this kind of forgiveness that you've accessed, it's like lifting 10,000 pounds. And people don't do that unless they have worked up to it. They have to build towards that, and so clearly doing this over time rather than, feeling like it has to all happen in one kind of huge lift is important, I think, an important insight. Tony, what about you? Any words of insight or wisdom that you would want to share from your heart to the listeners?
Insight or wisdom? I think Tasreen has all the wisdom. For me, I'll speak to trauma a little bit. I think for the most part, I think when we talk about trauma, I tend to think people go to the big ticket items, basically, like the trauma of losing a loved one by murder or the trauma of some other kind of violence. Basically, what I learned while incarcerated and trying to better myself is that we all suffer small slights and traumas throughout our lives, basically, that aren't of these great magnitudes, but they can kind of build up on each other and weigh us down. And if we don't address them, if we don't try to heal from them, then we end up carrying all this baggage around for us, and it makes it harder for us to address them later on in life.
Absolutely. Actually, Andrew Bennett that said you have to talk to Tony and Tasreen. He, in his episode, talked about all of these traumatic events that happen, but not the things that you think of, right? Like going to war or being, assaulted. And then he said, but I don't know if I really see myself as a trauma survivor. And so I think our conversation was about how the nature of trauma is also that it masks itself from us. These little traumas that you're talking about have a serious impact. And because of how trauma numbs us, we can't even see them sometimes. So I think that's a really important insight that you just shared, and I'll make sure that we include that in the final production.
Thank you. Could you make me sound smarter?
Oh, you sound perfectly smart, my friend. You sound great. If as long as the bandwidth is working, that's like the only thing I'm gonna have to like kind of figure out in the production. Wonderful insights from both of you and wonderful heart. And I appreciate you both so much.
Thank you to Tasreen and Tony for sharing their story with us. Trauma can build resentment, pain, and anger, and sometimes the longer it sits, the harder it is to find a way out. Forgiving can be tough, but forgiving is a path forward to restoring inner peace for ourselves and sometimes for others too. Thank you again to both of them for sharing with us on the Story of Our Trauma podcast.
Post-traumatic stress is not a life sentence. Trauma can be healed with the right insights, the right treatments, and the right support. The Story of Our Trauma is presented by Stella. Visit www.stellacenter.com to learn more about Stella's breakthrough trauma treatments. Please share this episode with people you care about who have been impacted by trauma. And remember to subscribe on Spotify and other streaming platforms.